All right, how's it going, everyone? I'm going to go over some news today, a reality check of where we are in the world with events. As many of you may have heard by now, U.S. troops have been deployed to Cyprus as fears of wider war in the Middle East intensify. There's already about 40,000 troops in the area of operations in the Middle East, sending some more to Cyprus for potential evacuations of civilians in Lebanon and the surrounding areas. There was reports of a massive explosion in Eilat. The attack on Eilat was carried out by the Islamic resistance in Iraq using drones. We've seen growing attacks from Iraq toward Israel. So you have conflict that involves Israel, Lebanon, Syria, and Iraq right now, as well as Iran behind the scenes. The U.S. aircraft carrier CVN 75 Harry S. Truman left its home port in Norfolk, Virginia today, and along with 3 escort ships headed for the Middle East, on the heels of concerns of a wider Middle East war. Can't show this video for too long. See, I guess it stopped playing. But here we see police officers in Israel beating up Orthodox Jews who are basically speaking out against what Israel is doing. This post reads, "Where does Hezbollah hide its missiles? The Zionist government says that everything is in the Lebanese homes. However, the militia released a video a few weeks ago of huge underground tunnels showing the missiles, transport trucks, and launching systems in those underground tunnels. But yet, this is the narrative. All right, so there's that video. I'm not sure if that's going to get this a copyright strike or not, but anyways, there's the video. So why does this have relevancy? Well, let's go ahead and watch this video. Once I find it. And here we go. Let's go ahead and watch this video. The post reads, "The CIA is not an intelligence agency, it's a covert action agency." Back in 1983, CIA officer Ralph McGee explained the American operating principles.
The CIA is not an intelligence agency, it's a covert action agency.
Go ahead and turn this up.
The CIA is not an intelligence agency, it's a covert action agency. Covert action being overthrowing or supporting foreign governments. Another part of covert action is disinformation. And the American people, in my estimation, are the primary target audience of the agency's disinformation operation.
Why does the CIA do this? What is the objective of the CIA when they put out disinformation, when they, you might say, co-opt the press?
One function of the agency, is noted by the Church Committee, is to create an international anti-communist ideology. Well, it's my thesis, the reason you want to create this international anti-communist ideology is so that when you go down to Nicaragua and you want to overthrow the government of Nicaragua, well, you can't justify to the American people going down there and overthrowing that government unless you can link it to a greater threat. It's just a little insignificant.
Linking it to a greater threat. That is something we're going to talk about quite a bit today.
Nation. But if you can link it to a greater threat, then you're justified in overthrowing it.
Where does Hezbollah have its missiles? The Zionist government says that everything is in the Lebanese homes. Well, you couldn't go destroy all the Lebanese homes and build Lebensraum, as the Germans would have said, living room, for your people without having a justified cause. People wouldn't buy it. However, if the homes are being used to house militants and militant weapons, well then, they're fair game, right? And I got to be careful not to show a video of Israel's strikes in Lebanon today, but there are human limbs, appendages, torsos of civilians and militants alike scattered about in many of these sites. Truly horrific sights. Let's go ahead and take a look at the rest of the Western events today. So going viral on TikTok is a video of Hitler's that's been AI translated. Apparently it has over 1 million views. One video reportedly racked up an additional 270,000 views, and another says 22,700 likes, with some comments including AH, the initials for someone from 1930s, 1940s Germany, was a good and kind man. And another quote read, "This changed my views on him." An account with more than 20,000 followers and nearly 4 million views of 12 videos with AH speeches, an outline of AH, and text that states, "Growing up is realizing who the villain really is." Spoiler alert, we're the bad guys. We are now the bad guys in the West. We are the bad guys. A TikTok spokesperson said in a statement to the Post late Tuesday that the social media app already removed almost all of the videos identified in the Media Matters report for violating our community guidelines, along with more than 1,300 pieces of related content that we removed proactively, and removed the remaining others today, the spokesman continued. Interesting time we're living in. Apparently, Trump has said to the Iranian threats, "We are going to blow your largest cities and the rest of the country itself to smithereens."
But if I were the president, I would inform the threatening country, in this case Iran, that if you do anything to harm this person, we are going to blow your largest cities and the country itself to smithereens. We're going to blow it to smithereens. You can't do that.
Okay, so why am I considering leaving the West when I have on one side Kamala Harris or on the other side Trump? We just heard him give a speech about indiscriminately and collectively targeting militants and civilians alike, many of which probably oppose the Iranian government, destroying their largest cities and blowing it to smithereens. Then we heard the crowd cheer for that in excitement. These are not the morals or the values or the ethics or the culture that I want to live in, that I want to pay taxes in, that I want to raise a family in. And certainly, for the most part, I see no prospects of a decent woman to marry. I mean, women don't even know what a woman is these days, it seems like in large part. So why do I want to leave the West behind for good? I think there's some serious bad times coming for the West, no matter who gets elected. And if you are listening to this and you are blind to how disgusting and atrocious the idea of destroying entire cities is because of a government's behavior, well, this is not the channel for you, my friend. A quip on that says Operation World Warp Speed, just like Operation Warp Speed plunged the vaccine into people's arms. This was the site at the UN's Pact for the Future. The lovely rainbow colors. So on one side, rainbow colors. On the other side, indiscriminate blowing up of civilians and governments alike. This side is largely pushing that same narrative as well. I have no desire to stay in the West. Here's a post from someone named Darren J. Beatty. It's more likely that the intelligence officials telling Trump Iran is behind the attempts on his life are actually the ones behind the attempts than it is that Iran being behind the attempts themselves. And that is a pretty good summary of our current state of affairs in the United States and much of the West. The U.S. plans to announce more than $8 billion worth of new military assistance for Ukraine on Thursday during Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky's visit to Washington, two U.S. officials told Reuters on Wednesday. So more money to Ukraine, while our country implodes, and we invite foreigners into our country and give them free money, thus infusing money into the economy and causing inflation. Yes, we're not handing out stimulus checks to citizens, but we are causing massive inflation through cheap free debt that people don't have to pay off via buy now, pay later loans, and infusing money into the system via giving it away freely to immigrants, causing massive inflation. More dollars chasing fewer goods and services causes hyperinflation. Why would I want to stay? You know, I hear a lot of comments from Russia and Putin about nukes and red lines and stuff, and to be quite honest, I think it's all a bluff, and here's why. Whenever, if ever, a nuclear device is used by either the US or Russia in a war, it will be disastrous for the world. Here's another thing. The winds predominantly blow west to east through Europe and into Russia. So if they used one of those, guess where that fallout would spread? Into Western Russia, which is primarily where the traditional Russian values lie at, is in Western Russia, and not the other cultures scattered about the Federation. So I do not think this will happen from Russia. Now, if the West were to use them first, then I could see that happening. And if that exchange did occur, the entire northern hemisphere of the world would probably be uninhabitable, while I think much of the southern hemisphere of the world would be largely inhabitable because of how the winds navigate around the earth. I think that would be the case, and the poor and the meek would inhabit the earth. Sorry if you can hear my sprinklers going off outside. Putin has stated that aggression against Russia by any non-nuclear state, but with the participation or support of a nuclear state, is proposed to be considered as their joint attack on the Russian Federation. So another red line that will inevitably be crossed. This post reads, an event long awaited. The president of Russia has outlined approaches to a new version of the state nuclear deterrence policy. The main changes are as follows. Aggression against Russia from a state without nuclear weapons but with the support of or participation of a nuclear armed country will be treated as a joint attack, thus enacting Russia's nuclear policy. Post then reads in italics, it's obvious which countries this refers to, as there's only so many nuclear countries in the world. Point number 2 from, who is this? This must be Dmitry Medvedev, the president of Russia. Belarus, as our closest ally, will receive equal nuclear protection. So any attack on Belarus by a non-nuclear weaponized country, but with the support of a nuclear armed country, will be treated as a joint attack. Point number 3, a massive launch or crossing of our border by enemy aerospace weapons, including planes, missiles, and UAVs, under certain conditions, could justify the use of nuclear weapons. Under certain conditions, not detailed here, could, right? So very fluid line here, which gives them the ability to say, well, this is one of those conditions, this is one of those conditions, this is one of those conditions. Like I said, I don't think they have any plans to ever use them first. It would be the decimation of Russia and the West simultaneously in mutually assured destruction. Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov's interview for a documentary titled The UN from the 20th to the 21st Century. And here's the summary of key points. Less than a year after the victorious powers established the UN based on the noble principles formulated in its charter, it became clear that the West, acting contrary to these principles, intended to launch a war against the Soviet Union. And not only merely a Cold War, but an all-out war. These plans, hatched by the then Anglo-Saxon nations of the Anglosphere led by the US and UK, have long become public knowledge. Once NATO was created, the Soviet Union circulated a large document which demonstrated the detrimental effect of that and the danger of building walls between East and West, especially in Europe, and called for respecting the UN Charter and for working towards this. Our call was not heeded. However, we kept fighting for justice and the implementation of the principles of sovereign equality of nations. Decolonization was a bright stage and a major embodiment of that principle. The Soviet Union was the main initiator of the 1960 Declaration on the granting of independence to colonial countries and peoples. Following its adoption, the number of UN states increased by 80 to 90 members. Basically, Sergei Lavrov is outlining that the Soviet Union came to terms with the UN Charter, and the West did the opposite of what the UN Charter stated. They tell us that the main goal today is to ensure the territorial integrity of Ukraine. And what is that video we watched about CIA operations? It is a misleading interpretation of the UN Charter, where the right of nations to self-determination is put before territorial integrity. Even before demanding respect for territorial integrity, the UN Charter demands respect for human rights, without distinction as to race, sex, language, or religion. And this reads, now that Zelensky's Z regime, which the West nurtured, has banned both the language and religious rights of a large number of its own population. The West has put away the banners it was waving for decades. The top priority now is to ensure the achievement of the initial goals and principles of the UN Charter in their entirety and as a whole, rather than selectively or occasionally. The reform of the UN Security Council is not a one-off event. It's a process which has been ongoing since the time the United Nations came into being. Nevertheless, it relies on principles that must be preserved at all costs. The main principle is that the Security Council reform should be based on a broad-based agreement among states. It does not say consensus, but it does state broad-based agreement among states. We haven't, this is Russia, we have invariably supported the legitimate aspirations of India and Brazil to secure permanent seats in the Security Council. However, African aspirations must be met as well. Africa has common collective positions, which we respect, and we would have liked that. Our position implies providing additional seats for Asia, Africa, and Latin America. We are open to some of these seats being permanent, but we need to achieve general agreement before we move forward. It is a complicated process. I don't see any chance for bringing this process to a swift and expedient completion anytime soon. Since the UN was created, there has never been a time, a region, or situation that involved the United States in one way or another, where the country would actually respect that principle. Every time, everywhere, they acted as a hegemon, or like a bull in a china shop. When they wanted to punish Russia, the West abandoned all the principles which it was feeding to the US, and which it declared sacred. The same is happening to the principles of the UN Charter. The West is trampling and destroying them without a moment's hesitation. And why is that?
The CIA is not an intelligence agency. It's a covert action agency. Covert action being overthrowing or supporting foreign governments. Another part of covert action is disinformation. And the American people, in my estimation, are the primary target audience of the agency's disinformation operation.
Why does the CIA do this? What is the objective of the CIA when they put out disinformation, when they, you might say, co-opt the press?
One function of the agency is noted by the Church Committee, is to create an international anti-communist ideology. Well, it's my thesis the reason you want to create this international anti-communist ideology is so that when you go down to Nicaragua and you want to overthrow the government of Nicaragua, well, you can't justify to the American people going down there and overthrowing that government unless you can link it to a greater threat. It's just a little insignificant nation.
An ideology that's connected to a greater threat. An ideology that's connected to a greater threat. A greater threat, right? To justify action. Vincenzo De Luca, member of the Democratic Party of Italy and president of the Campania, this is a quote from him. Was it really necessary after the fall of the Berlin Wall to expand NATO along Russia's entire western border? Did you really think there would be no reaction? And I've given this scenario in videos in the past. If the cartel set up outside your house on the sidewalk and showed signs that they were planning to storm your house, would you sit there and wait for it to happen, or would you do something about it? The quote continues, when Soviet missiles appeared in Cuba, the U.S. set up a naval blockade, and rightly so, to my point. Instead of keeping Russia chained to Europe, we gave away the largest reservoir of raw materials to China. How can you be that stupid? You can't wage open war without saying what the objective is. What is the objective? Exactly. You've heard this in my videos. Define success. If you fail to meet success, you have failed. That means losing. What is the objective? Victory over Russia? Then you're crazy because you're leading us to nuclear war. Perhaps. I don't think Russia will do that until they are truly backed into an actual corner, and they are not right now. The quote continues, is that clear or not? Today, there are no more conditions for peace. Exactly, because they don't want peace. They want total control. On October 28, 2022, they have not yet occupied all these areas of Ukraine. There could have been a ceasefire. There can be no peace today. The ultimate goal is a ceasefire, but for now, let's stop the carnage. Then, let's see if we can get China, India, third world countries involved. Let's see if we can create the conditions for peace. If we keep going the way we are, where the hell will we arrive? And hell is exactly where we will arrive. Hell on earth. The Hungarian foreign minister, can't say that name, Szijjártó, mutual respect is now missing on the international stage. Well, was it ever there? Or was there the perception of mutual respect before, and now the perception has faded entirely? The West stigmatizes anyone who stands out from the mainstream. And it's exactly what we see here in the U.S. Channels getting targeted, getting suppressed, being removed, being deleted, being blacklisted in many aspects of life. Be it Putin, Trump, or anyone else, if there is no willingness to engage in negotiations, if we are not prepared to listen to and understand each other, we will reach a point where the concept of war will prevail over the concept of peaceful cooperation, and borders will be closed once again. This leads me to another one of my points for this video. If you are thinking of leaving the West, do not think that the borders will always be open. Consulates can be removed. Embassies can be removed, can be blocked, can be exiled, can be told to leave the country. From all parties. Travel can be sanctioned, meaning that if you do travel to these countries, you will be committing a crime in the eyes of the country that you are a citizen of. For now, there is still access. But do not think that if war begins, that it will be accessible easily as it is now, especially with the push for biometric data on everyone to know where they are, where they're coming from, where they're going to at all times. Cameras, fingerprints, live video feeds. Everyone's talking about building a wall to keep people out of the US. But remember, a wall, and a digital one, can be built to keep people in the US and in Western countries and out of Russia. There's growing anger in France as a Moroccan illegal immigrant who had not been long released from jail for graping a student has went on to delete another young student. Named only as a 22-year-old, Taha O, on June 20th, he had reportedly been sent straight from jail to a detention center for illegal immigrants pending his expulsion, but a judge set him free on September 3rd, as the expulsion process was getting bogged down in administrative delays. More blood on the hands of Europe's leaders. One country, or one society, is importing cultures that are destroying it. Another society is trying to import people who have a cultural agreement with conservatism, with traditional values. Make up your mind where you want to be when this all goes down. This post from someone on X reads, "You carpet bomb the third world until the sand glows, and I'll bring the 100 million survivors to Ohio." And it's I believe that's Dick Cheney and AOC side by side. One, the proverbial warmonger, the war pig, and the person bringing them all here. Which is exactly my point. Two heads of the same bird. Working together in tandem. Why would I want to stay here? Why would anybody? Well, I think there's a lot of people with piercings in their face and tattoos all over their face and weird colored hair and a bunch of weird beliefs that would like to stay here, and they can have at it. The U.S. Virgin Islands delegate says the role of the DOJ and FBI is to serve and check against white nationalism, great replacement theorists, Christian nationalists, white fragility, fascists, and the twice impeached convicted felon, former president, and would-be dictator Donald Trump, the quote reads. There is a video of her from C-SPAN out there playing, and I'm not going to play it because I'll probably get a copyright strike because they're not going to like what it's associated with in my content. But you can go watch it if you'd like to. A U.S. Virgin Islands delegate. Not even really part of the government, representing a territory of the U.S. Here's an interesting tweet. I'm not going to read it. It's on the screen, though, if you'd like to go ahead and read it yourselves. Pretty interesting indeed. Pretty interesting indeed. Another post from X suggests this is a great idea. I think this is supposedly supposed to be Alex Jones saying this. This is a great idea. The ultimate middle finger to the rotting globalist establishment. Alex Jones supporters urge Elon Musk to buy InfoWars and sell it back to him. I'm guessing at a very, very cheap price of like $1 or something like that. And Elon Musk is prone to giving people the middle finger, literally and figuratively. Ukraine's allies play down hopes for Zelensky's, quote, victory plan breakthrough. Officials say president's pitch won't amount to a game changer. At least one of allies suggest renewed outreach to Putin. And this is perhaps some deep intel, maybe disinformation, maybe not. I'm going to go ahead and share it, see what comes of it. From a Ukrainian source, the source says, the post reads, our source in the general staff said that a new trend is currently gaining ground in the Ukrainian armed forces. Soldiers who volunteered to go AWOL in the first days of the war. The problem is so serious that the general staff is asking the presidential office not to relax the legislation and to strengthen criminal prosecution in order to bring the situation under control. Right now, entire companies are leaving their positions right at the front and going to regional centers where they are hiding from the police. I have seen video footage of a lot of people avoiding being conscripted. I've not seen any videos of this. I've seen videos of people from the Ukrainian military fleeing their positions and retreating. That does not mean it is an example of this. Just wanted to share this as a potential data point of where things are. From the Czech president, Pavel, Ukraine should be helped to achieve its goals only if they are possible at all, said Pavel. He also again called on Kiev's allies to return to reality and to cede territory to Russia. Now, here's an interesting thought. It's a thought experiment I was having maybe an hour or so ago. We saw Lindsey Graham come out and say there's trillions of dollars worth of raw materials and minerals in the ground in Ukraine, thus showing what the U.S.'s real interest in Ukraine is. And if you wanted the population to be decreased to such a state and infrastructure to be leveled in such a state that BlackRock, who's already proposed investments into Ukraine after the war, could go in and purchase stuff, and thus the congressmen and senators could make a lot of money on the backside, wouldn't it be in the best interest to continue drip feeding money and munitions to Ukraine to bleed down their population at the behest of Russian hands? Just a thought. And stuck in the middle are Ukrainian people who think they're fighting for their own interests in their own country. And in the end, it'll be the U.S. that owns their assets and their land. We're already seeing the discussions happening. The post continues with a quote, "If Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky presents a plan to stop Russian aggression against his country, we need to evaluate and do everything possible to achieve Ukrainian goals, but not at any cost," the Czech president told reporters in New York. "I have not said anything like that for a long time. I already warned at last year's conference in Munich that we had unrealistic hopes," said Peter Pavel. Hopes that the war will end with a resounding success for Ukraine in a few weeks or months, in his opinion, could be very dangerous for everyone. I've never questioned that we should support Ukraine in restoring its territorial integrity. This is the ultimate goal. We just have to be realistic. Defeating Russia in Ukraine at the cost of destroying half of the Ukrainian population is probably not a victory. The quote ends by the Czech president, Peter Pavel. The U.S. Congress has demanded an investigation into Zelensky's visit to a plant in Pennsylvania, the Washington Examiner writes. Republicans suspect it was politically motivated and aimed at supporting Harris, noting that the meeting was attended only by Democrats. Here's a different twist on that. If the election results are already determined, and you know a certain party is going to win, why would you waste any time, resources, talking to the other party? In a letter to the U.S. Department of Justice, they indicate that Zelensky was brought to the plant on an Air Force military transport plane, and that Secret Service agents provided security. The department asked to check whether the visit was illegally paid for with taxpayer money. If this is confirmed, then representatives of the Democratic Party will have to provide a full report on these expenses to Congress, the magazine notes. This post reads that Russia's transfer of weapons to the Houthis will lead to a deterioration in its relations with Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and China, writes the Financial Times. Saudi Arabia and the UAE are vital allies for Russia's economic survival during the war. Coordination with the Gulf Arab states in OPEC Plus has given Russia leverage over the oil market, and the UAE has become a critical conduit for Russia's efforts to evade Western sanctions. Yes, a lot of things are flowing in through the UAE to Russia. Beijing, meanwhile, gets most of its oil from the Middle East, and its ships have already been attacked in the Red Sea, despite promises from the Houthis to provide safe passage. Therefore, according to the FT, it is more likely that if Ukraine is granted the right to carry out long-range strikes against Russia, the Kremlin will take the path of escalating relations with the West, which will probably not cause much irritation among its allies. This could include new sabotage, espionage, and disinformation operations in Europe, and threats of nuclear war, although this could alarm China and many countries in the global south that do not possess nuclear weapons. This does not mean that horizontal escalation is out of the question, or that nuclear weapons as a last resort do not exist. If Russia feels it is losing in Ukraine, it will become deeply concerned, and factors that should currently weigh in favor of restraint may suddenly become less important. As I said, unless Russia gets backed into an actual, real corner, and as a last resort. Zelensky announced at the UN General Assembly that Russia plans to strike 3 Ukrainian nuclear power plants and their infrastructure in order to disconnect them from the power grid. What was that video? We watched the CIA operative. You have to create a boogeyman that's bigger than just a little issue. This is a big boogeyman. You attack a nuclear plant, 3 nuclear plants. You release a lot of nuclear material in the surrounding areas and into the air, thus potentially causing a severe escalation of things. And I'd have to ask, what is the value proposition in this for Russia to disconnect Ukraine from nuclear power by striking the power plants? Why not just strike the substations? The U.S. power grid, I've seen many reports that say, there's probably a dozen key substations that if they were targeted and attacked would severely cripple the U.S. power grid. Don't imagine it's too much different in Ukraine. Russia hasn't done so thus far and has left just enough power on for people to live subsistently without being able to create mechanisms for war. Why would it all of a sudden go attack nuclear power plants? The risk doesn't match the reward. Continuing, referring to intelligence data, claims that the coordinates of the objects were obtained using satellites of other countries. Previously, he said that it was talking about Chinese satellites. He calls on the West to step up support for Ukraine to prevent this. He also stated that the Russian Federation destroyed all Ukrainian thermal power plants and part of the hydroelectric power plants. Exactly to my point. What did it not touch? The nuclear power plants, because the risk-reward ratio is not there. Low risk here, high reward. Creating a boogeyman in order to take action. This post reads, Ukraine's justice system accused of enabling war criminals and targeting entrepreneurs. Massive human rights violations are taking place in Ukrainian prisons, this post alleges, according to London's Daily Express newspaper. The Daily Express article quotes a U.S. State Department report on human rights abuses in Ukrainian prisons, which kind of aligns with that video of mine that was taken off of YouTube. It says prison conditions are harsh, with physical abuse, lack of adequate medical care, and inadequate nutrition being acute problems. There are also reports of cruel and degrading treatment by both prison officials and other inmates. Ukrainian security agencies are actively using criminal cases to blackmail and extort local businessmen, which aligns with what I shared in my video that got banned. Due to massive human rights violations, European courts are increasingly refusing to extradite people to Ukraine. But still, Zelensky's Ukraine is a beacon of democracy that Putin wants to destroy because it shows Russians how the real democracy works, according to the same British newspaper. You see the problem here. The story doesn't balance. The scales don't equalize. Europe increases its dependence on Russian fertilizers. The EU has withdrawn the purchase of Russian fertilizers from sanctions after a sharp rise in gas prices. There is a direct correlation between your access to energy and your ability to have an economy. Europe doesn't have access to energy and the raw materials it needs to produce economy. It relies on others, largely. Poland increased purchases by 2 times, France by 5 times, Germany by a third, Bulgaria by 25 times, Romania 54 times, Ireland 18,000 times. For Europe, Russia is number 1 in fertilizers, while for Russia, the EU market is not the main one. Last year, EU fertilizer production fell by 8.4% to 28.2 million tons. The production of phosphate fertilizers fell by 64% to 0.43 million tons. The production of potash fertilizers fell by 12.5% to 2.1 million tons, and mixed fertilizers by 9.5% to 11.4 million tons. About 20% of European enterprises have closed. Oops. And the remaining ones operate at only 40% of their capacity. And here is a video that goes over what I just said moments ago and what I've said in my other videos. Since energy is the industry that powers every other industry, there's a direct correlation between the cost of energy and your access to it and having an economy. By making energy more expensive and less reliable, we make everything more expensive and less reliable. This comes from energy quote-unquote expert Alex Epstein. Doesn't take an expert to see that correlation. all the energy related problems we have experienced in recent years, high gasoline prices, high heating bills, high electricity bills, are the result of government dictated green energy. When you shackle the most cost effective, scalable source of energy, fossil fuels, and you subsidize unreliable solar and wind that wouldn't otherwise be competitive, energy necessarily becomes more expensive, less reliable, and less secure. Not only that, you are then directing a significant portion of your energy output towards these other endeavors. Whenever you take energy input, stuff you pull out of the ground, fossil fuels, right? So natural gas, oil, coal, and you don't spend that energy finding more energy and you divert it towards other activities, the more you do that, the more expensive that energy becomes, because you're now competing for that energy. Whereas the industry producing energy, when there's fewer goods and services out there competing for that energy, the energy is cheap for them to continue to find more energy. So if you have a massive mall, which is Europe, the UK, Ireland, the US, Canada, where it's all based on consumerism of crap, you now have a lot of energy diverting to all this other crap, which makes finding more energy more expensive because there's more crap competing for that energy. And then you take part of that energy and you make unreliable and expensive alternative energy sources. You are significantly increasing the cost of energy, and thus you're making it more expensive to have an economy, and therefore hurting your population's ability to have a good standard of living. That is the mathematical equation. It's actually very simple. An investigation has been launched in the U.S. due to Zelensky's visit. I went over that. So here's an interesting post. Apparently, this is a NATO updated plan for a World War III scenario with Russia, as the German military says an invasion could happen by 2029. Let's take a look at this. Let's see if there's some key strategic lessons we can learn here. So looking at this big line, which I've pointed out in my other videos, almost as if it's very obvious from a war positioning why Ukraine is important and why Russia's doing this now. You follow this red line down, and it comes along Belarus, and then it dives way deep in here, behind Belarus, which would potentially allow for NATO forces to come through here and cut off Belarus, encircle it, and then head into Russia. Down here in Turkey, that's not really possible because you have this whole area to contend with, as well as if something did ignite in this area, you best believe this part of the world is going to take advantage of these two forces duking it out and come here and wreak havoc, and then come up here and wreak havoc, in which it's already exported its people into this area and into the US, in which these countries have already welcomed them with open arms. And so you have operatives operating behind their lines, ready to be activated at a moment's notice. And even if they're not operatives, they are sympathetic to this region's ideologies and theologies. So why is this Dnieper River so important to get to? You see, I would make a nice line right here, all the way down through here. Yeah, that's a very important move to make. And it signifies why this territory is so important to NATO and the US. Not just because of all the minerals, right? You got a bunch of coal and iron deposits in here, which when combined makes steel. You got a bunch of natural gas in here as well. It's usually where you find coal, you find natural gas. So from a resource standpoint, super important to an area of the world that has very little. As we read in another post earlier, natural gas is a key ingredient for making fertilizer. Very, very, very important for this part of the world to maintain access of these resources if they want to ultimately end up in here. See, Ukraine is incredibly important existentially to both these parties. Because if this party is allowed to continue to suck the resources out of here, it enables them, it emboldens them to continue all this stuff we see going on in the West, geopolitical and societal, culturally, in the West, and then to continue its efforts in subverting Russia and its cultural values and its society. There are so many reasons why Ukraine is important to the West, which makes it important to Russia. The West and the East are locked in for eternity until this whole thing comes to a grinding halt. The end. Big long border up here with Finland, Norway, Sweden, which allows for a route to come in. You see a landing spot here in the Netherlands, the vassal of the US. Coming up here to this border front, coming here with this border front with Belarus. You see forces coming up through Italy, through the Balkans. And notice they stop at Ukraine. So what is the assumption here? That Ukraine would still be a battlefield in 2029 when this thing is supposed to be happening. It doesn't show them going into Ukraine here. It shows them stopping at Ukraine, as if this will be the new red line. There's a lot you can pick up if this is an actual infographic released by NATO. I mean, why wouldn't they publish it? Just from a military standpoint, you could see this is where forces would go, up to this border, into here if it was still a war front, right? You wouldn't come up through here. That would expose your backside to attacks through here. That's why I think Turkey is a strategic addition to NATO and not someone they actually want to be partnered with. And based on a lot of Turkey's remarks, I don't think they're actually truly aligned with NATO, but are certainly doing it for their own strategic benefit. This acts like a big block for this part of the world invading militaristically into this part of the world. We already went over Russia's updated nuclear doctrine. Went over Middle East stuff. South Korea continues to send trash balloons and poop balloons into South Korea. Seoul warns of a military response. Again, I think this is a bluff. This is another place in the world that, we talked about if Russia used nuclear weapons, what would come after that? If South Korea did anything militaristically against the North, full-on war. Full-on war. This is the exact thing that North Korea has been building up and existing for the last 50 years, 60 years, whatever, is for a war. This is what they live for. They want to invade South Korea. They just don't have the justification quite yet to do it. They would need an attack to happen. And what would that do to U.S. assets? Right, we're already heading towards the Middle East, talking about a war with Russia, and we have recruitment rates at all-time lows. We have the military trying to pivot away from the woke agenda in order to try to increase retention and increase recruiting, which is a thinly veiled move at this point. It's too late. So is this even realistic? South Korea and Japan would probably be in Taiwan, and maybe the Philippines and perhaps Australia would be in this fight, probably against China and North Korea. That's about all I have for this video. Carried on quite a bit. Hopefully it has been of value to you. If it is, here's my plug. Please like, please subscribe, please share. What I would like to do on this channel eventually, for those of you that have made it this far, is I would like to do live discussions with other people about these topics and make it more engaging. But with 30-something subscribers, 40-something subscribers, I'm probably going to have 2 viewers, and that's going to be me and the person I'm talking to if I do a live at this point. So if you'd like to see that, if you'd like to engage on that, if you'd like to be a potential participant in that, well, I got to grow the channel. Doesn't make any sense to do that stuff right now. Until next time, stay exponentially aware.